you're going to...
And then I'm going to talk about how to add attachments into your data inside your geodatabase. And then we're going to, for the first time ever, actually throw some SDE, ARC SDE stuff into the talk. So we're going to be talking a little bit about versioning on SDE.
Good. And then I'll talk a little bit about annotations, and then if we've got time, Robin is going to...
I'm going to show you how to read a geodatabase when you don't actually know what's in your geodatabase.
Yeah, so bonus. And somewhere in the middle there, we're going to have a little Q&A session, and then at the end, if there's any interesting questions as well, we'll try and address those as we go. I think we're going to start the morning with the poll, though, so Stephanie's going to fire up a poll and ask us about your use of FME and Geodatabase.
Yep, and so...
So I think one of the things that you should bear in mind, of course, is that FME technology is embedded in the Esri products as the Esri Interoperability extension. And so most of what we're talking about today is relevant to that. And I think, Robin, you said you were going to put the examples together as toolboxes.
Yeah, we did that the last time we did an Esri talk, because often the people that are listening may not necessarily have a full FME. And so what we did last time was turn our workspaces into toolboxes, and then when you get the email with where you can download the examples, if you need them, you can also download them as toolboxes.
Yeah, so that's a good thing there. So yeah, everything there should be good for interop extension. So I think Stephanie's just about to close off the poll there. And
great.
Everybody
Good.
Can see those results, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Just as a quick note, somebody asked about reading and writing metadata. We won't today be talking about metadata. However, towards the end we talk about an upcoming training course, and we do talk about metadata in the training course. So just so you can sign up for that if you're interested in metadata talking.
That's right. So if you do have questions as you go, we have 3 people sitting waiting to answer your questions as we're talking. Laura, Brian, and Candace at the top left up there. So they will address questions as you go if you use the questions panel. We'll try and make public some of the kind of more interesting or difficult questions that they're answering. So that's good. So do fire off questions as we go. Keep our colleagues there busy.
Okay, and the other thing too is if we don't answer your question during the session, because sometimes it can get a bit busy, we will be following up with everybody that asks a question, and we'll get back to you at the end of the session. And then just a reminder, were you going to remind everyone that this is an advanced webinar?
Yes, well, moderate to advanced, I would say. So if you are new to FME, then some of this might seem a little bit confusing, but we will address that as we go. And of course, we should also mention that there's always a follow-up from these webinars, so you will get an email, and it will have the links to the recording of the webinar, the PowerPoint slides that we've got here, if you want to preserve those pictures of Robin and I in our costumes. And
just don't Twitter them out.
Yeah, and also all the example workspaces and Robin's toolboxes will be on those links as well. So all in a day's work, so that's what we're all about here at Safe Software: connect, transform, and automate. So the connect, transform issues around mostly working with FME desktop, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Automation is really around the FME server and the FME cloud products, so we're not touching on that today. There's other webinars that we've given that cover those issues. If you are new to FME, so if this is a first-time webinar for you and you haven't been looking at FME before, there are some good resources on our web pages getting started with FME. And then once a week we run a webinar that's kind of an overview of the FME products and a quick demo, a rudimentary demo of how to get started with FME. So you can use those resources if you are relatively new to FME. A great presentation that actually is around the geodatabase topics that we're talking about today was a newbie's perspective of geodatabase model translation, and that was given on one of our world tours by Laureen Volker of the city of St. Louis County. She was new to FME, and so she was given the task of moving a geodatabase from one data model to another. She'd never heard of FME when she was given that task, and she talks about that. So there's a set of slides on that. And then actually during our recent FME user conference here in Vancouver, I thought it was a good presentation, so I actually kind of did a karaoke presentation of her presentation and tried to get across her main points. So there is a recording of that. It starts, I don't know what this number here means, but it's quite a long recording of a series of presentations that starts around minute 60 of this recording. And of course you'll get this link when you get these PowerPoint slides on the link in the email that we'll be sending as a follow-up to this webinar. Okay, so on to business, I guess, Robin. So we're going to start the morning presentation with some discussion about CAD and GIS. I guess that's still a really big part of usage of FME users, working with CAD data, getting CAD data in and out of GIS. So I thought I would just skip through some ideas and points on that, talk briefly about some schema mapping ideas that you might have getting CAD data into GIS. In the GIS systems you have, a lot of the times you've got networks there. So we have a couple of tools that you can use to validate your network, so I'm going to talk about that. And then we'll have a quick look at some domain issues as well. So let's start off with some ideas on schema mapping. Actually, the presentation I was mentioning there by Karen Volker, she has some really good thoughts on schema mapping. And so when you're moving data from a CAD system to GIS, or from a GIS to a GIS, if you're doing a GIS migration, at some point you have to decide how you're going to map across the schemas. And people always underestimate how much work this is, actually. So here's an example of some of the data that we're using from the City of Vancouver Open Data that we're using as some of our examples. And it's a crosswalk table in the background here that kind of illustrates what you've got to do to decide how you're going to get your data from A to B. So in our CAD data, we've got a layer called control valves. It's got a bunch of attributes attached to it, and it's going to go across to the W control valves feature class. We've been using, for this example, I'm using the Esri Utility Simple Utilities model from their resources pages. So it's a canned data model that they've got up that you can download. And you can see here, sort of underneath the transformer list there, that some of the attributes map across, some are missing, so the water subsystem doesn't go anywhere, so you might have to add an attribute to your geodatabase model. In the case at the bottom here, we've got enabled lifecycle status type. Those are not present in the CAD drawing, so you might have to set some default values or whatever, depends whether they're mandatory or not. And you can see some of them on the very right side of that column, they're listed as domains. So you might also have to put together some domain mapping as well. So the schema mapping process can be relatively complex, and actually really that's got nothing at all to do with working in FME. That's just got to be built up. So some examples of good transformers you can use for this task: the attribute renamer, the attribute creator, the attribute value mapper, schema mapper.
Yeah, so we've got a link on that schema mapper, because the schema mapper is one of those transformers that basically when you read the help it says, I think you better phone Pro Services if you want to try and use this transformer. But just recently we've published a really good set of tutorials up to our FMEpedia site which step you through one by one the many options within the Schema Mapper for getting your schema from that source model, which is the AutoCAD model in this case, through to the Geo Database model as your destination. And so there's different options in the Schema Mapper for mapping attributes, for mapping feature types, for assigning default values. All the things Mark just mentioned are described in one of the various tutorials here under the Schema Mapper. So definitely bookmark that if you're at all interested in using the Schema Mapper transformer.
And I think we'll probably do a webinar on this down the road.
I would think it would be a really good idea, because it's a very powerful transformer that looks just a little awe-inspiring when you start to work with it.
Yeah. So I wasn't going to go into too much depth on the Schema Mapper this morning. We're going to look at some of these more common transformers, and also should note that a part of schema mapping can revolve around some conditional mapping questions you might have. So let's have a look at a workspace that does some of this work.
Boy, Mark, you've blown Don's rule of only 3 transformers in there.
I know. Well, we're not wrapping fish and chips.
Well,
these are complex problems. They need complex solutions.
That's right.
So
perhaps we could zoom in a bit so we can read some of that stuff.
So this is what would it look like if you were starting to do a full CAD to GIS data conversion. What I've got down here are some of the additional layers that we've got in this open data that we've downloaded from the City of Vancouver website. It's got the sewer data in there, so I haven't started working with that. So we're just working at the moment here with the water data, and we can look at the control valves. Very typical of working there is I've got the attribute creator in here. And so it's setting, in this case, what I'm using the attribute creator for is to set some default values, because the enabled and lifecycle status that the data model, the geodatabase data model needs, they're not in the CAD data, so we're just setting some default values there. You can concatenate attributes here, so here we're using the string expressions to concatenate together some attributes to give the location of the control valve, so that's the kind of thing you can do in there. So,
well, hang on, Mark. What are those little red boxes in there? Little blue boxes.
The little blue boxes. Well, let's go down to one of the blue boxes down here. So let's have a look at some of the actual water pipes. So we've got 4 different types of water pipe in the AutoCAD data coming in as separate layers: abandoned, DFPS, which I don't know what stands for, but is actually something to do with our earthquake-proof water system here in Vancouver.
That's good to know.
And then we've got the distribution mains and the transmission mains. And then, so here's an example. Robin was asking about those blue boxes. So this is the blue box here. It's got nothing to do with recycling, really. It's setting the type attribute, and so this is where you can do some conditional mapping in your schema mapping process. So in this case here, what I'm actually doing is I'm setting the type domain that's going to be loaded into the Geo Database, and what I'm doing is using a conditional statement that says, well, if the feature type, which is the layer name in this case, starts off with the DPFS, then we know that's the one of these earthquake backup sewer pipes.
So it gives you the option of
set the output value there, and that output value will be what is set as the type attribute there. So we've got 4 layers coming in, and we can set the output values of those 4 layers within here.
So how did you get to that conditional definition, Mark? You just double-clicked on it.
I double-clicked on it, but on the drop-down here, on any of these fields, you can open the text editor, the arithmetic editor, or the conditional value setting tool, which is sort of a combination of a test filter and a bunch of attribute creators, actually. So really useful tool for many different tasks. I'm just using it for schema mapping here. And here I'm just doing using the attribute creator as well, just to do an attribute rename diameter to diameter millimeters, from diameter millimeters to diameter on the destination database. And then we can do some domain mapping. So here we've got some domains set up, the material. So these are coming in as descriptive values on the CAD data. they're getting mapped across to coded values that will be populated into the geodatabase material attribute, which is attached to a domain. And most of that can be done in the Schema Mapper tool, I think, except probably some of those conditional mapping rules, more sophisticated tools. You might have to have a special case for working with that. Okay, so those are kind of some of the common tools that we would suggest you try using to do your schema mapping, and a good way to get started with your CAD loading into the GIS. So one of the other parts of loading CAD data into the GIS is what the quality of the data is. And so there's lots of different ways to do data validation in FME. I'm just going to here touch on some of the ideas around validating network data. So if we've got a pipe network and it's coming from a CAD system, it might not have full connectivity. A very typical case in point for connectivity in CAD data is when they draw the line work and that's attached to something like a valve. What they do is they stop the drawing of the line work at the edge of the valve symbol, so the pipe network actually doesn't connect at the symbols. And so there you can use some of the snapping intersection tools, because sometimes it's handy to remove complex edges from the pipe network, so you don't have sort of T-junctions that don't have connectivity. And then what we've got in FME is a very handy tool, actually, which is what I'm going to illustrate here, is what we call the network topology calculator. And where's that workspace? So I've got that workspace up and running already. And so the network topology calculator will actually look at your network and then decide how well connected it is for you. And so this is a really straightforward way of testing the topology of your network and to see that all the line work does connect. So typically what I do is I'll read it in. I'm just going to read in one layer from the transmission lanes mains AutoCAD file. I'm going to run it through the network topology calculator, and what that transformer does is it tries to connect everything together, and then everything that's connected, it will give a network ID, and so each part of the network will get a separate network ID. And then for sort of visualization and debugging purposes, I'll use an aggregator here and group by that network ID. So everything that's on the same network will get bundled into one huge feature, and then we can send that out onto the data inspector and just have a look at those results. And we'll just see how well connected the transmission mains are from this AutoCAD data that's come from the city of Vancouver. So hopefully our pipe network is actually solid here in Vancouver, otherwise we're going to be in trouble.
Well, is it water or sewer? Because it's somewhat worse if it's one or the other, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is the water transmission main, so it should be we should be okay. We'll just not be able to turn our taps on.
Yeah. Well, are you getting water to your house? Then it must be working.
Yeah, it is working definitely. Yeah. Okay, and then somewhere we should be seeing the data inspector fire up. There it goes. And what we can see is we've got a whole bunch of tables which are different aggregate pieces. So these are the individual pieces of all this network. You can just see faintly here the lines of the network. And so if I click on one of those, you can see the bundle of transmission mains features that were all pulled together as being connected, and the pieces that weren't connected. And so if we were to zoom right in on one of those there, we would see that there's probably a piece missing here. Maybe that's where there was a symbol or something in the CAD data, and in here we can actually measure to see what a bigger gap that is. And so that's about a 7 or 8 meter gap between this piece of the transmission main and the end of that one. And so then we could go back and do some snapping intersection tools, run those, try and make this connect across, and then rerun this little test workflow and see what the results are.
Sure, and I just want to comment on the fact that if those of you are not yet using the Data Inspector, one of the cool things about the Data Inspector is that you can turn on these background maps, so that if you're working with data in a particular area, you can then, it should show up on a map of that area, and it's a good way of checking that your coordinate system is in the right spot and those kind of things. So it is possible to turn on those background maps up here in your tools. Nope.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Tools
options.
Options, and there's some options there for background maps, and you can either turn it off or you can use one of these many services that are available. A couple of these are free so that you don't have to pay for them. ArcGIS Online, of course, that would have been a good map service to use for an ArcGIS webinar.
That's right, yeah. But we don't have enough credits here for that. So.
Or you can actually set it to your own background. Some people, when they're working with their data, have got, say, an area of interest that they're working with, and it's in something, even something like MapInfo or whatever, and you can set your background map to your FME format and work with it that way. So that's something cool about the FME Data Inspector, if you haven't played with it much at all.
Yeah, and it gives you good context.
It does,
here we can see...
if your lines showed up in Africa, you'd know there was something wrong with your data, right?
Or with your coordinate system or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Great.
All right, moving on. Let's see what we've got next here. Oh yes, we promised something about domains and subtypes. So, so domains and subtypes. So actually in the Esri training session that is coming up, we've got the date set for that. We'll point that out. We do talk a little bit about domains and loading domains and subtypes into your geodatabase. First, you have to map them across. So I already illustrated that. You can use either the schema mapper or the attribute value mapper to take descriptive values that might be coming from your source data, like your CAD, and push those across. And then you have several options when you're populating domains and subtypes. Several options. You can create those domains and subtypes in the FME feature types in your workspace. And so on the right-hand side here is an illustration of that. And in that workspace I had here, I've got an example of that in here. So this is a feature type I'm not using for the water mains, but here in that, on the user attributes, you can see I've set the lining up as a coded domain. And then there's a little edit button there. You can say what the domain name is going to be, whether you want to create the domain, what type of domain it's going to be, and then you can list off the codes and the descriptive values. And then when you create a brand new geodatabase, that's the domain that will be created in that geodatabase. We actually don't recommend you take that approach at all. It's kind of tedious to do. And there are other issues around that in the sense that sometimes domains are used between various different feature classes, and so then there's issues around which feature class gets loaded first and so on.
And this may not be the full set, and there isn't any way within FME doing it this way to add new values to that domain.
At the moment.
That's right. So once you put it in that way, that's how it is. So there are better ways to do that.
So then your other option is to write to an existing geodatabase. Well, that's obviously a very common task anyway, particularly if you're working with an enterprise geodatabase, so that database already exists. The domains that you're writing to should already exist, and so you don't need to worry about it at all. All you have to do is write those coded values, and off you go. You can populate the domains. And then the other approach, if you're writing and creating new geodatabases, so this probably relates more to people writing file geodatabases, is to use an XML workspace document as a template to create the geodatabase. And so that XML workspace document, again going back to this example here, so this is how I created the destination geodatabase in this CAD to GIS example, is here we have an option on the geodatabase writer to use a template file, and that's an XML document. And so that XML document is created in your ArcGIS, in your Arc catalog. If you open up Geodatabase, do I have one handy here? Here we have one here. And I right-click and go export XML workspace document. I don't know why they copied us with that workspace thing. That's confusing because we use the term workspace.
I know, it was a shame they picked up on our wording.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, you go in there and you just select schema only because that's all you want. Otherwise, you're going to get a really huge XML workspace document with all your data in it. You only need the schema, export it out into some convenient file, and then FME can reference that as the Geodatabase XML template file, and that's the schema that will be used to build your complete geodatabase. And the great thing there is that we'll have all the feature classes, domains, subtypes, and everything, as well as featured data sets and everything.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to worry about actually creating them here. And so all you're doing in here is populating those and doing the schema mapping. So that's a really the best way of populating domains. Write to an existing geodatabase or use an XML workspace document as a template to create the geodatabase. But then sometimes there's another problem with domains, and that's the idea of extracting domain tables.
And this is very relevant because someone just asked, how can we get existing domain information and put them into something he can use in his workspace?
I'm psychic, I guess.
You are.
You
just are psychic. We absolutely hit these questions.
Yeah. So this is, well, I'm sure there's a way of doing it in ArcGIS, but we haven't found it. So if anybody knows, they can send in an answer to that question. Is there a tool in Esri for dumping out the domain tables?
There's probably some Python somewhere.
So just in the same way that I illustrated how to create that XML workspace document, that's an XML file. And I don't know whether Don Murray is listening to this webinar today, but he will love this because we now have always have had great XML reading capabilities in FME. So we can read back that XML workspace document and interpret it and dig out the bits that we want, which in this case would be the domain and the subtype tags in that document. And in this case here, what I'm doing is I'm just dumping them out into an Excel Excel document spreadsheet.
And I just was going to say, which is why Mark lost his thread there, was that we need to throw some kudos out here to Dean from our group, who put this idea together and figured out how to do this. And there is actually an FMEpedia page on how he's put this together, and some explanation in more detail of the transformers that Mark's going to show you fairly quickly. So if you're interested, you can go look at the FMEpedia page.
And so here it is. So this is a workspace. I'm using the XML reader pointing at that XML workspace document that's dumped out of ArcGIS. There is some little configuration options that you have to set, and basically what you've got to say is what tags do you want to match in that document and pull out. This data in the XML workspace document seems to be scattered around a little bit, so there's the data element, the subtype, the field, and the domain, and so I'm extracting all of those and putting them out to a little Excel spreadsheet. We can go and have a quick look at that. That's what that looks like. So the results of that workflow are the subtypes themselves. So here's the subtype with the description, the coded value, and I can dig out the alias. You can dig out almost anything else. I'm sure I'm missing something here. Did this relatively quickly this week. And then for the domains, the actual domain codes and descriptions. And then you can also get a list of what domains are attached to what attribute as well. So you can also blend things together in different ways as well. So you can get quite a lot of information out of that XML workspace document, all through using the FME XML reader and dumping that out into Excel.
And then you could use that Excel file within your schema mapper to take that data and put it back into somewhere, right? So
yeah, you could actually, yeah. So if you wanted to do the schema mapping, absolutely. So if you had a CAD standard out there and you are requiring that your CAD users use descriptive values of a certain type when they're populating their CAD drawings, you could use that Excel as a basis for building your schema mapping spreadsheet, actually. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, someone said it's also great for creating a Visio diagram of an existing geodatabase, so there's that would be interesting too.
Oh, okay. So you can build a Visio from a spreadsheet, I guess, in some way? Well, that's fantastic. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Good. Great stuff. Okay, so were there any other questions there that we were going to play around with? And see, we're at half time there, so actually we probably should keep moving. We've answered a few questions on the fly.
Just one was talking about surface coordinates in CAD and how do you get them into grid coordinates in ArcGIS. So we have
done that before. That's absolutely, you can use some of the affine mapping tools in FME. Usually those ground coordinates come with the affine matrix that is on the drawing there or something. That's how I've seen it in the past. Dave Campanis here in our office has done quite a bit of that work. I'm not sure whether we've got a knowledge base article on that, but certainly they could fire in a question, and we've done that before several times.
Yeah.
I know that.
So if your question wasn't answered, I noticed somebody had made an attempt at it, and in fact she's our coordinate specialist, or reprojection specialist. So if Candace hasn't helped you, then send it into support. And then someone else asked about AGOL background maps from your own service, and I know the one we have on the Data Inspector for background maps is from your ArcGIS online service, the public one, and we're working to change that so that you can point those background maps to your own in-house service. So that may be coming.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. So over to Robin and some attachments.
Great. So I was going to just show you quickly how to add some value to the data that you might have in your geodatabase. And so around about ArcGIS 10 or 10.1 came the ability to add attachments to a geodatabase feature class or feature class. So it's similar to writing to a relationship, but it's loading documents or JPEGs or that kind of stuff into the same record, into the same place as you're putting your feature. So let's just take a look at what that looks like. I'll get back to here in Arc Map. So we've got some data here. Let me just bring in my geodatabase. And we have, so this is our City of Vancouver neighbourhoods, and then we've got some points of interest here that we might want to take a look at. So what we did on these points of interest was added some value to them by adding in some, not that one, that's just a community centre. So here we have a library at this particular point, so we added a picture into that library. So that was a point feature that now has a photograph attached to it. And this one here is a file haul which has both a photograph attached to it along with a PDF document that shows us the number of crimes that happen around that particular fire station. So I thought it would be kind of fun to do that. And just as an aside, this is another workspace that I used to take all the crime data for the city, figure out which fire halls was around, and then produce a PDF document with a table in it. So there may be some interest in that particular workspace too. So it's basically a non-spatial PDF. But what that means is that I can hook that PDF up to my point data, and I can get all that data just by viewing my information in ArcMap. So how did I do that? So what we did was using a workspace that wrote that attachments data. So and just, yeah, let's take a look at the workspace. So to create an attachments association within your geodatabase, you can do that with your Arc Catalog tool. So if I just go back to ArcMap here and open up my geodatabase, that's the annotations one. Let's just go back to, must be here, I suppose, huh? Where's your Dropbox gone? Mark's Dropbox, Dropbox.com, of course. It's always fun traveling around somebody else's computer. But anyway, here we go, my versioned attachments and my results table here. So to create those attachments within ArcMap, you need to right-click on your feature class, manage it, and you'll see that most feature classes have this create attachments, and that's what builds for me these other two tables, an attachment table and a relationship between the attachment table and the point of interest. And so those are the three pieces we're going to write to within our workspace here. Now this is very similar to writing a relationship class that's just a spatial relationship. However, in our case, we're writing data and documents. So let's take a look at what the workspace is doing. I'm reading from my point of interest table here, which is a GML document, and it's got these three feature classes in it, some libraries, some community centers, and some fire halls. And I do a bit of schema mapping here to make sure that the schema matches up to my destination table. So I'm just really using the renamer in this case to match old attributes to new attributes and assign sort of default values to some of them. This is actually creating a new attribute. It's not coming from anywhere, that kind of thing. But the critical part is to do the setting up of the relationship attributes that will make the actual relationship work. So what I need to do here is set an attribute that says that this feature type that's coming into my feature class is part of a relationship. So there's a special attribute that I need to set for that to say that it has a relationship. And I also need to set this GeoDB OID value to be a unique value for each of my features. And so once I've done that, that's all I need to do to write the data out to the actual point data. So here's my point of interest table with my various attributes on it. Some of these I had to set to constants because I knew that my city was always going to be Vancouver and I didn't have that data anywhere else. So this is the new constant handling in FME 2014 also. So that gets me my source features. Easy stuff, taking my points, adding a couple of attributes to it, and then running it through to my destination. Rather more interesting is how to get the documents in there. And so I have a set of photographs and PDF documents that are sitting in a particular location on my hard drive, and I can use the path and directory reader. So this is a particular reader that just reads down a path and will tell you what's there, what files are in that path. And so I'm reading everything in my case so that I will pick up both the JPEG files and the PDF files, but I could have put a filter on here to just select one or the other. So that's what my path and directory reader is doing. So that gives me things like the root name of the file, what the extension of the file is, how big it is, etc. So a bunch of interesting information about the particular file. And that's what the attachments table in the Geo Database is looking for, information about that attachment. So once again, I need to set the relationship attributes, the fact that this feature has a relationship and my unique OID value, and then I can start spinning these off to that attachment table. So there's a few things that I can do here. I need to copy some attributes into the required names. So when you build that attribute attachment table, the attribute names are fixed, so I have to make sure that my source attributes match my destination attributes, and I also have to get the data in there. So I have another different transformer here that you may not have run across before, called the attribute file reader, that will read that file in from the path that I pass to it and stick it in a destination attribute.
So that's kind of like reading some data and dropping it in a blob.
Exactly, yeah. So I picked that I want it in binary, and that the attribute there will be a blob field if you looked at it in the database underneath, and that's where it's going. So it's reading the document into the attribute, and then I can write to the attachments table, filling up the required fields. So you'll see these are the fixed fields. Now I don't give it an attachment ID because the ArcObjects writer works that out for itself. So that's 2 out of the 3 tables. The third table is the actual attribute relationship table itself. So this is very common. Most relationships have a relationship table in the middle, and here we need to set up the relationship attributes. So I need to tell it what the origin OID is coming from my source features, what my destination OID is coming from my destination features, and once again Esri has kind of taken the word destination here and using it as part of a relationship, whereas we talk about it as being on a writer. So these are fixed terms. You have to use your origin OID and your destination OID, and then we run them.
I think a lot of people would think that as parent and child or something like that.
Exactly,
Left and right
yeah,
join,
yeah. So that's the kind of terminology Esri calls them, origin and destinations. So how do I decide which pictures go with which point feature? So in my case, my documents, the name of the document all matched a name field on my point features. And so I'm using a feature merger here to match the name of the document with the path name, or the name in the field with the file name in my from my path and directory reader.
So this is like the fire station name or the fire station number.
Exactly.
And that matches the picture number that you've got.
Exactly. So you've got to find something between the two that will match so that you can build this relationship between the two of them. Now, because I know I've got multiple documents, I'm going to set this to process multiple suppliers, which means that I'll get a list of answers out of here. So for those cases where there's 2 documents, I'll get a list with a couple of members in it. And so then I have to use a list exploder to explode that out into individual features. Once I've done that, I can pass them through to my relationship table, and it will build up that relationship for me.
So FME can't build these relationship tables, is that right? So,
that's right. So I would have had to pre-build them using your template example.
Or write to an existing geodatabase.
Or write to an existing one, yes. And I could have used a template if I'd wanted, because it's easy enough to export this out into a template and then rebuild it.
Yeah.
The other tricky thing with this is that when you want to rerun it a second time, you only need to truncate the point of interest table, because this one, because they're a relationship, it'll drop everything for you. So you can set the truncate table first for just the point of interest table. Okay, so that gives you that nifty stuff in ArcMap where you can look around at the
So where's my local fire station that I spent so many hours with my son?
Here.
There we are.
Yeah, and of course, if you wanted to live where Mark lives, you just want to make sure you don't have...
Look at all the crimes down there.
Yeah, don't park your car outside his house, as I well know. So there you go, all theft from an auto under $5,000. Great. So that was loading attachments. So let's go back, and the next thing I wanted to touch on briefly, and of course all of these topics have to be fairly brief because we don't have a lot of time, was to talk about geodatabase updates using the enterprise geodatabase, so working with your ArcSDE, and just the difference between transactions and versioning and parent and child versions. And just as a little snippet here on the side, you can see that I'm viewing in my ArcMap 2 versions of this same data. I've got a default version here which I updated that shows a couple of different last editors, so the GIS technician put a few in and then I went and changed some of them, so this is the green and the yellow dots. And then after I'd done that, Mark came along and he decided he wanted to modify some of these things, so he created himself a child version and modified them and put his own name in there, and so the red ones are his modifications. So I've managed to do this in FME, create changes in a default version, changes in a child version, and now I could use ArcMap to reconcile and post them, or I could have done it right within my FME workspace. So let's take a look at what that looked like. So here, if I go back to my workspace, I am going to open up a new one. And has it remembered where I am? No such luck. So let's go up here and we'll actually just do a drag and drop. So my demo's here. Versioned updates. So just to start with, we'll just quickly have a look at what it's like to work with a non-versioned table. So if I go into my ArcMap here and take a look, let's shut these things down. Over here in my catalog window, I'm now working down here in the database connection section. So I have built a connection to one of my enterprise geodatabases and I've got 2 tables in it. Let's turn one of them on here. And we'll just leave that stuff there and we'll just zoom in a bit so we can actually see what's going on here. And so my post address points table, actually I don't have that one on here. Let's drag it in. My address points table, it's not versioned. It's, if I right click on it and click on manage, you can see that it's not a version table. So any work that I do on this table happens quickly. It also puts the changes into place right away. I have no opportunity to reconcile them or do any of that kind of stuff. But a pretty standard method of doing updates on your geodatabases is to set the writer mode on the geodatabase to update. So the writer mode is hidden down here in these advanced settings, and people often write to us and say, I wrote some data to my database expecting it to update, but they haven't turned their writer mode to update.
Well, we are changing that, aren't we? So that'll, in 2015, that'll look so much better.
We are doing some wonderful things
but
with
that's
the writer mode.
So we'll leave that for another day.
That's a year away at least. So we are working on the complexity of these settings. So
cleaning it up.
And cleaning it up. So here's our writer mode setting. And the other thing you need to do when you're working with updates is set two format attributes which are very specific to the writer. They don't have to show up here on my destination feature class. They just have to be set as the features arrive. So I have an FME_DB operation set to update and an FME where clause that says where a particular address ID is equal to an incoming address ID. So this is like a typical select statement from your SQL where address ID equals quotes around the value of the address ID from my source features. So you just have to be careful that you get that syntax right. And then I'm using a parameter here as my last updater, my last editor. So I've set it to a particular value of this user parameter. So if I was going to run this workspace, I can do a prompt and run, and it will ask me what do I want that name to be, and I can pick something else. In my case, I was playing around with Tiny Tim, and click OK and run my workspace. And it will update the data, and then when I refresh it in my ArcMap, you'll see that the last editor will have changed.
And that's the great thing, of course, of the Enterprise Geodatabase is that it's multi-user. So FME and ArcMap can look at it at the same time. If we were writing to a file geodatabase, we would have to have closed that ArcMap view of that geodatabase, wouldn't we?
Well, it sort of depends what you're doing, but yes, there are times when you seem to have to close. The file geodatabase does lock up quite a bit more often than an enterprise geodatabase does. So if we take a look at our attribute table here and we go across to our last editor, you can see that I've got some Tiny Tim stuff in here. So it obviously is working, and we'll sort descending so the Tiny Tims are at the top. So that's an example of a very quick and easy transactional update. On the other hand, the postal address table, this is a version table, so this becomes a little bit more complex because we have to pick the version that we're going to be writing to. And so if we take a look at that workspace, we can see here we've picked the version that we want to write to. So here we have a transactional version, and in my case here I've picked the child version that I want to write to. And I can change that value. I could pick my DBO default version if I wanted to write to that. Otherwise it's pretty much the same. You're in your advanced parameters here. You still have writer mode set to update, but we have this versioning option here on our transaction type, which means that it will take note of the versioning, it will decide which version you're writing to, and then if a little bit further down we have some reconcile and post settings here, so you could decide to reconcile and post, in which case this child version will be written to, and at the time the workspace ends, that will be reconciled and post and presumably produce a reconcile log somewhere if there's issues. And we also have a rather a misnomer of a setting here where it says it will delete that child state, but it turns out that actually doesn't work, so it will cause a problem. So just be a little bit aware that by default this is set to yes, and you can run into problems with these two. So one other thing with transactions and versioning, the features to write per transaction can be set to a variety of different values. You can set it to 1 if you want it to commit that transaction after every write. If you want it to write 1,000 features at a time, that's the default. Or you can set it to write 10 million so that everything gets written as one transaction. So there's a number of different parameters in here that are worth taking a look at if you're working with your enterprise geodatabases. Also, just a quick note that versioning is slower, and that's because it does have to do that add-delete table updating that goes on in the background with your ArcGIS. Okay, and so that basically means then you can end up with different sorts of data here. One here will show that we've got Mark did some changes, and one here shows that Robin did some changes. And so different kinds of information based on the different versions. Okay, so back to your PowerPoint and on to the next topic.
Yeah, extracting annotations. So in the training and a couple of the previous webinars we've given, we've talked about loading annotations. Got a couple of types of annotations where you got labels in Esri, regular annotations, and then feature-linked annotations. So once in a while, people have a reverse problem, and that is getting annotations out of geodatabases into a platform where annotations are not supported in quite such a sophisticated way. And that's kind of typical of users who may be using data that originates in ArcGIS in a mobile platform that is not an Esri-based mobile platform. And what they often want to do is they want the data to look the same in the destination as it does in ArcGIS, but that destination format doesn't support all that sophistication of the ArcGIS labeling. And so the labeling in ArcGIS is relatively sophisticated. You can have these annotation expressions when you build your annotation that tells the annotation how it's going to be colored, how each part of the annotation is colored, multi-line annotations, and you can see here as well we've got some leader lines. And in this example here, I'm writing out to MapInfo, which does support colored and different font styles, but it doesn't support leader lines. And so if you're writing out to a less sophisticated GIS or CAD package, we have a couple of options on the Esri readers that allow you to split out multi-part annotations. You can set that to yes. And then also more interesting here is split out complex annotations. You can set that to yes. And so what that does is that anywhere in an annotation that originates in your Esri Geodatabase that has a different styling, and that means the styling, whether the font color changed, the font size changed, whether you had a line feed or something, that is all split out, and then those are all individually positioned as separate labels. And so if we go back to our Esri Geodatabase, how do I get rid of this thing?
Select all and then delete, remove.
Remove those layers, and then somewhere here I've got my City of Vancouver, that one there. And where's my annotations?
It's gone and lost the source.
It's gone and lost the source again. Okay, well, we're not going to worry about that because we've got a picture there. So anyway, that's what our annotations look like in the Esri Geodatabase. And so I've got a workspace here that I can bring up that will just illustrate what you can do to extract those annotations. So we're going out, in this case we're going out to MapInfo, and so what I've done is I've added the MapInfo Styler. So for the line work here, I can use some MapInfo styles and I can use some custom symbols. I can pull out the symbols and so on for the individual points, and for the line styles here, I've used the MapInfo styles to select what kind of line style I want. And then also one of our colleagues here for one of our customers built a custom transformer which is called the Esri Annotation Renderer. And what that custom transformer will do is it will pass through the text as is, and because the MapInfo data also understands font and coloring, that comes out quite cleanly. And but it will also render out the accent and the leader lines that you might have associated with that text. And so just remember what that was. That is all triggered by using this split complex annotations. So when we run this, we'll get some MapInfo files created somewhere. It does take a little bit more time because what it is doing is rendering all the line work and splitting out the text. So you often will get more features coming out than you had going in, because each text feature might be split out into 2 or 3 or 4 different parts. So that's one of the disadvantages of having to do this. But once it's all been done, there we've got our results. We can open that containing folder that's got those MapInfo files, so that's there. And then if we go into MapInfo, we can open that data set. Where is it? Oh yeah, it's all scattered through here. I wonder if we can have any luck just copying and pasting that. There we go.
So that MapInfo Styler, are there other stylers for other formats?
Yeah, we've got lots of stylers. KML, AutoCAD, MicroStation, and so on. Oops.
I'm pushing for a GIS styler.
Yeah,
I'd love to get a way of styling annotation for going back into our ArcGIS.
Yeah. So in the resulting data here is when that data comes out of the ArcGIS. In ArcGIS, for example, looking at the valve data, this feature was just one entity, the leader line, the second part of the annotation, the air gap there, and the location. So to get the position to match exactly what we had in ArcGIS, and the font size and the font type, whether it's bold or not, we've split that into 3 different parts, same as we've done here. It's been split into 3 different annotations so that it could be located accurately, so that the output and the input, so if you've taken a lot of effort to position your labels in your Esri Geodatabase, and you want that label positioning to remain the same in the destination GIS, you can preserve that through using the split complex annotations. That's the wrong workspace. It's down at the bottom here. Opening multiple versions of FME. And also using this Esri annotation renderer, which is available on our store, so you would download it from the FME store.
Yeah, it does generate a few extra features, but that's just part and parcel of the problem with the annotation. Esri's drawing engine is so powerful and so clever, and it does such wonderful things. It's very hard for any of the other products to produce the same kind of annotation. So we do tend to have to break it up if we want you to place it in exactly the same position. So.
Okay, so we're running out of time. Are you going to squeeze in your bonus?
Shall we squeeze in our bonus? Let's have a look at what we're talking about. Okay, so this was a little example, but funnily enough, we've been asked this question probably 3 or 4 times in the last month in tech support. And so although we have a very good FMEpedia article, again, which was produced by Ken from our group showing how to do this, I thought, you know, if we can squeeze this in, it's worth doing. And the problem comes up when you want to read multiple geodatabases or multiple layers out of geodatabases, and you don't know what the names of them are, and you don't know if it changes, you want to be able to pick up any new feature types. And so what we have is a Schema Reader. And so the Schema Reader, and there's 2 of them, but one of them is the Any Format Reader. And if you take that reader, it will read everything within a particular file or folder. So here we can set our geodatabase, our Schema Reader, to point to our geodatabase, and it will read in as features the names of each of the feature classes in that geodatabase. And then we can pass them through to a feature reader, which will actually read the features inside that feature class.
Why don't you open the workspace?
So let's have a quick look at the workspace, and then we can output it all to a new format. So let's see where that workspace is.
And then I think probably people can download that and figure most of it out for themselves.
Figure most of it out, exactly. But so taking a look at the schema as a reader, this Schema Any Format Reader, the only trick with it is that it's not a particularly good dialog box here. So you actually have to type this in or copy paste this in. You can't use the system dialog here because of the fact that a file geodatabase is a folder of files. So it gets a little confused about that. But once you've set it to read any geodatabase at all, we can remove the attributes we don't care about, and now use the feature reader and this little known option on it that says query the feature types in this particular attribute. and the attribute is coming from the Schema Reader, and it's called FME Feature Type Name. And so this Feature Reader, again, takes a little bit of fiddling to set it up. We'll read them through that query feature types in attribute setting. Then once you've done that, you can mess around with the attributes a bit, and you can, when you get this workspace, take a look at it. And I have merged the actual features with the schema of those features and enabled me to write them out as shapefiles. So let's just run this, and with luck, everything should be in the right places. When you move computers and change folders, sometimes things aren't quite where you expect them to be.
So this is using some new functionality on our dynamic workflows, and we're working on some knowledge base articles on this, so they will be available. And if you pop open the schema thing and expand that a little bit, I guess just zoom in on that, because that would show us the attributes that are coming in there.
Oh yeah, you can actually see them over here in the format attributes. Well,
so it's these special
three
attributes
at the top. Yeah.
So if you throw those three attributes, actually the FME data type and the FME name and the name of the attribute at a writer in dynamic mode, those are the attributes that will get created on that feature type. So it's another variation in dynamic workflows. It's very powerful.
Yeah, because I haven't got a schema source, because I don't know what my geodatabase looks like, and it'll change all the time. So I set my schema source to just be a null reader, and I let the schema come through. As you can see here, the 11 schema features came through, along with all the features after they were read out of my feature reader. And if we go back and take a look at that C temp folder, this is where they are, so they should all be in here. So what I've ended up with is shape files based on each of the layers within that geodatabase that had data in them.
And the cool thing is, if you now pointed that at my geodatabase, you'd be able to read that geodatabase in it with exactly the same workflow.
Exactly, and then we weren't going to talk server, but you could publish it to server and let people read a geodatabase and get their data out in any format. So wait for that workspace, and then you'll be able to understand what's going on.
And I know Stephanie's now getting frustrated because we're over time, and so we're breaking all the rules. So the next webinar up, 7 or so ways to unlock the power of GE Small World. So that's coming up August 6th. So if you're still interested in Small World, that's something you might want to look at. Don't forget, our free training is always online, and online instructor-led training. Actually, we have one going on right now as we're speaking. There's a desktop session going on.
And there's another one in August, because there were a couple of people here said they were new to FME. So there's an FME desktop training, I think, about August the 19th.
Yeah.
So that's worth signing up for. And then if you're looking at server, there's another one just towards the end of the month, next week or the week after. So take a look on the website and sign yourself up. They're mostly 2 4-hour sessions. The Esri one is just a 1 4-hour session.
That's right. So that would be a good training series for the summer. Take an FME desktop, get your scratch up your skills with the new FME 2014, and then jump into FME and Esri at the end of August. So August training a month while August is going on.
Okay, and so we've had lots of questions, some of which haven't been, our poor old answering team has been typing till their fingers must be cramping up on them. So those of you that didn't get an answer, we will get back to you. Not a problem about that. And thanks for listening. And when we've got a bunch of different options here if you've got more questions.
So always contact us at support through our web pages there, safe.com/support. Call our support line. If you want more information about FME, info@safe.com. Any other troubles, contact myself or Robin directly. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. So
thanks a lot for joining us.
Yes, and I hope you've all managed to learn something on this speedy tour through FME and Esri.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.